Hi, hello, good afternoon, happy July. I know time passes in a linear fashion, but I cannot believe that we are over halfway through the year already. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my June reading wrap up. If you're new, welcome. My name's Charlotte. I do a monthly reading wrap up as well as some other bookish content. So let's see where I'm up to with my reading for the year. I've read 44 books this year so far, which I'm really pleased with. This month, in the month of June, I've read 7. I was really holding out hope that I would make 8 because I'm listening to an audiobook, but I just haven't been that hot on listening to it in the last few days, and I only have 2 hours and 46 minutes left. And I thought, I could listen to it and then do this video, but it's getting quite late in the day. I've got quite a mix this month. Mixed reviews, mixed format, mixed genres. Sorry, I know with the window open you can probably hear like seagulls nesting and passing cars, but you should all be used to it at this point, and I'm just way too hot. So the first book I read was on my Kindle and it was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This is a romance. It's often listed as like a contemporary romance, and I will give you a brief synopsis now. Our main gal, Nora, is a literary agent and her whole life is books. She is not the romance heroine that she so often reads about, which is partially why she agrees to go visit Sunshine Falls with her sister Libby. In Sunshine Falls, she's convinced she's going to run into like a hot bartender or, you know, like a robust and sexy handyman. But instead, she keeps repeatedly bumping into her nemesis, Charlie Lastra, who is an editor from the city. She bumps into him again and again and again and again. My thoughts. I've really enjoyed this book for the most part. I read Beach Read a couple of months back. It's in one of this year's reviews. I can't remember when. And I had quite high hopes, and I liked Beach Read, but I just didn't feel that invested or like that connected. So I didn't have huge expectations of this book, but I knew that Emily Henry was really popular, so I thought, you know what, let me give it another go, because it's quite unlike me to not like a really popular book, I think, especially romance. But I will say I'm really glad I did pick this up because I felt so invested in Charlie and Nora's romance. I felt really invested in them as a couple, and I found Charlie so romantic. I love this kind of like dark, brooding man. I love a hard-working, like mean city girl that is unapologetic about this, that is a workaholic, and also more than that, I love a man that loves her despite this and is not only accepting of it but incredibly respectful of it, and that's why he loves her and he's deeply admiring of that. Like, I really love that kind of energy. More representation for the mean girl tropes, please. One thing I think Emily Henry does really well is like the emotional storyline of it all, because even though I didn't love Beach Read, I ended up crying, and I obviously cried in this book as well. I'm not gonna lie, I think she does a bit too much on the dead parentage front for me and a bit too much on the grief front, but that's probably because as someone with a lot of dead parentage, I don't like reading about it, but that's a me problem, that's not her problem. It just makes for an incredibly emotional read for me. I think it's too much dead parentage for me to handle, and I just like never read trigger warnings in books, so it's hard because I'm like, this is so romantic and so lovely and so horny, and then I'm crying because it's so sad at the same time, so it's like sad crying horny. Do you know what I mean? I really enjoyed Nora's relationship with her sister. I think sibling relationships in books are really nice. It felt very complex, although at certain points I did find Nora's inability to allow her sister any kind of like basic autonomy very, very annoying. I think when it comes to her sister, she's very, very immature, and despite her being this like amazing workaholic, like very communicative and clever individual, she lacks like a basic ability to speak to her sister or communicate with her. And that was just really frustrating. Lacking any kind of ability here to speak to her sister truthfully about how she feels, or just even like ask her sister, you know, what's going on. I get really annoyed when people can't communicate in books, but I do understand that communication is often used as a plot driver or lack of communication. I especially love Charlie and Nora's like quickness and their wittiness and their repartee, and it felt very natural. I think in a lot of books where they try force like witty banter in, it can feel very stilted and your eyes like aren't ping-ponging on the page, but with them I was like like I could feel it, you know, when you can feel that kind of easy, natural like sharpness, dry, witty sense of humour that I think can be really hard to capture on paper. Yeah, I just really love them as a couple. I thought I really like Charlie specifically. That's my book boyfriend now. I do think kind of once they got past this sexy romance beginning bit, this happens a lot in romance books, I felt like their romance kind of like plateaued. I wanted it to be like developed a bit more into what, like, I don't know, but that's just how I felt. But yeah, I would recommend reading this. After doing a bit more research, I can see that a lot of people think this is Emily Henry's best book. It's hard for me to say, having only read two, one that I didn't really like and one that I loved. So I might give another third a go. I don't know how many she has, so if you have any recommendations of what one I should read by her next, if she has more than one, let me know. Next up was another read on my Kindle, and I read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This is, I guess, like a young, it's not young adult, it's like young, I think it's aimed young, stop saying young fantasy, like fiction, horror, question mark? I don't think it's quite horror, but I do think it's like ooky spooky. Coraline's just moved to a new house with her mum and dad, and she is exploring as children do, and she finds a mysterious door that leads to nothing but a brick wall. One day she unlocks it, and on the other side of the door is exactly her house, exactly her layout, but something's different. The food is better, the books are better, the entertainment is better, and there is her other mother and other father. They would quite like her to stay on that side with them forever, but they want to make a few changes. This is a short review for a short book. I love the movie Coraline. It's like one of my comfort movies. So I thought, oh, you know what? I've never read the book. I should get into it. I just wanted a quick little read, so I picked this up. Did go in with very high expectations of this because I love the movie so much, and it delivered in some points and it didn't deliver in others. I enjoyed this to some extent, but I did just feel like in some areas it was a little lacking, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it, I don't think. So I didn't know that the book is different to the movie, or should I say the movie is different to the book, because that came first. While it is hitting all the main plot points, they match, there were some things that were a little different. I didn't actually mind that. I found it quite enjoyable, but something about the book just felt a little less atmospheric to me. I don't know if maybe because the book is initially targeted at like a younger audience. I find I sometimes struggle with books that are young adult or even younger, but yeah, it just didn't feel as atmospheric to me, and I found myself almost a little bored. It still had that very creepy sense of spookiness that Neil Gaiman does really well, and it had good whimsy and it felt almost right, but just something about it was just, yeah, a little lacking for me, and I can't quite pin my finger on it. I think it might have just been that at the end of the day I wasn't in love with the book as I was expecting to be. I think maybe if I'd read Coraline when I was a lot younger it would have been amazing, but I think having read it for the first time as an adult, it maybe just didn't hit the spot for me. I don't doubt that the book isn't amazing, but it probably just didn't do it for me on this occasion, and yeah, I think that's really all I have to say, because I don't feel like there's a huge amount of the book for me to review. So my third book of the month was a physical book. I actually posted me reading this in my reading vlog, so if you haven't seen it and you want like my immediate thoughts, you can head over there. It's like a cute bookish vlog. It's something I haven't really done before, but you might like it. I'll put the link for that in the description box. My third book of the month was Mrs. S by Kay Patrick. Isn't this cover just absolutely beautiful? I just spent ages looking for one of my favourite books and I couldn't find it, but I was basically trying to show you that the cover for this is really similar to Lapvona by Otessa Moshfegh. Not really similar like badly, but they just are the same vibes, you know, dark cover with a neon script writing on it. So a young Australian woman moves to an elite English boarding school in the middle of the countryside to fill her new post as the school's matron. I don't know why I did quotation marks, but matron. Here she meets the headmaster's wife, Mrs. S, who is the epitome of an older, sophisticated, elegant and sensual woman. Over the summer, their unspoken desire and longing and yearning draws them together, and they start an illicit affair. So to start on an incredibly positive note, the hot and sticky British summertime countryside energy where the air is still and the heat is like wavy lines and it's unbearably humid and hot is just perfection. That kind of atmosphere is encapsulated perfectly in the book. It's giving hot days, cool dark corridors, you know, when the heat doesn't subside into the evening and it's just still and warm. Lesbian yearning over English countryside gardens, gay affairs, secret church sex. That is like the vibe and the atmosphere of the book. So on paper I should have really enjoyed it, and I don't think I didn't enjoy it, but there was just a few things to me that made it like a slightly unenjoyable read. The first one being that I found it quite difficult to get into the writing style, and a la Normal People, I mentioned this in the vlog, the dialogue has no punctuation, so at times for me it was quite hard to differentiate when a conversation was going on versus when it was just like an internal monologue. I think once I got used to it, it was all right, but I struggle to read stuff like that sometimes. I suppose it's for like the first 100 pages where you get into it. It's that kind of stilted, stop-starty reading where you're just trying to like establish the tone and the pace and the voice. Obviously Normal People in this book are nothing alike, but I have heard from like friends and reviews that if you're dyslexic, it can be quite difficult to read that style of writing. I did find it difficult that there are no line breaks, which is also ultimately the most frustrating thing about reading this style of punctuation. It is just solid walls of text, which make the lack of punctuation in the dialogue a little bit more frustrating to read as well. It was difficult. It wasn't a deal breaker for me, but I can understand that it would be for a lot of readers, so bear that in mind. It is just solid walls of text all the way throughout. This book should have been something I really loved. It's the kind of thing that's right up my street. I love books where there's like straight up religion or religious allegory or like metaphor. I really fuck with books that are kind of about love or like love affairs or some kind of element of hiddenness. I especially love like sapphic romances, but it just at points I thought it felt a bit aimless. The plot to me as well, it didn't feel like hugely convincing. It was just one of those plots where something happens and then another thing happens and then another thing happens, and it didn't feel kind of like it was all meshed together. It was very just like ambling through the plot. I know that there is this genre of kind of like no plot, just vibes. I mean, that is what a lot of contemporary fiction is, and I know I'm not like generally a huge fan of those books for the most part, but this one, it felt like a little bit too far into that genre. I don't know, it just didn't hit the spot. Something about the way the plot was laid out just didn't really like fully allow me to be immersed. The yearning was fantastic. Some of it was so beautifully written, and overall it was incredibly atmospheric. I loved the boarding school setting. I loved the religious overtones. There was so much that I loved about the book, but it just missed the mark for me. I just don't think it knit together in a way that felt complete for me. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think it's a wonderful idea. I just don't think it was executed in a way that was as brilliant as I was expecting. I feel really bad saying that. I'm not very good at reviewing books badly, in the sense that I don't like to. It was kind of like firmly in the middle for me. I don't feel like I lost any time for reading it, but yeah. Next was another book on my Kindle, and I read Open Water by Caleb Zuma Nelson. The genre of this book is contemporary fiction. It's also a short book, about 145 pages, and let me give you a synopsis. Two young people meet at a pub to discover they have a lot more in common than they thought they did. Both attended private school, both are Black British, both are incredibly creative. He's a photographer and she's a dancer, and slowly we watch them fall in love. Okay, so firstly, I know that the synopsis for this book that I've just given is not enough, but I cannot synopsize it in a way that encapsulates the whole of the book, you know? Like I said, this is a very short book, maybe I think it's 145, 150 pages. I'd heard such incredible reviews about this book, so I'm really glad I read it. Now we've hit June and July, I'm really sensing this summer theme that's in a lot of my books, in case you haven't noticed. I'm really reading into books that are feeling very summery. So if you've got perfect summer recommendation books, please get them in my comments. This is a sweet and romantic and, dare I say, like realistic representation of summer in South London. I love love. I felt myself falling in love with them too. I love watching best friends fall in love. I'm biased because I love my best friend. I just really enjoyed watching them very slowly and sweetly fall for each other and like tentatively explore this romance that's blossoming. It's very pretty, this book. It's very beautifully written. The prose is like almost a bit flowery, but not too flowery at all, not at any point. It felt very poetic, and I think a lot of people in online reviews have compared this book to being poetry without reading poetry. I've seen that come up quite a lot, and I would be inclined to agree. So I found the second person perspective narrative very disconcerting in the beginning because it's really not what I'm used to reading, but I feel like this perspective is so intimate and vulnerable and allows us to be closer to the characters. You just feel like you've really got an insight into what's going on and into how people are feeling. It's very vulnerable, and I think it allows us to like capture perfectly what it feels like to fall in love with your best friend. It gives us an insight that I think other narrative like first and thirds don't give us. It feels like you're watching something you shouldn't. It feels like you're literally like looking over into the fishbowl of a world you've created. Again, it's a short review for a short book because I think it's really good, but like it's a very short and poignant read about love, but it's not just about love. It's about masculinity, it's about black masculinity, it's about race, it's about fitting in London. It's just about so much. I think you should read it. It won't take you long. I think you should read it. I'd be very keen to hear your thoughts. Okay, on to the next book. I've been dying to talk about this book, and I talked about it a little bit on Instagram with a few of you because a few of you responded to my story because I couldn't help but post my thoughts. Anyway, let me not get too ahead of myself. My next book was on my Kindle, and it was Powerless by Lauren Roberts, and this is a fantasy. It is book 1 of 3 of the Powerless trilogy. I believe book 3 isn't released yet, but book 2 has just come out, but we'll get into that in a sec. So I'm going to give you a quick synopsis. So in a world where magic exists, if you don't possess any kind of magical ability, you are classed as a felon. So our main character, Pay, she is a felon. Father has honed her skills and taught her how to pretend that she has a magical ability. So that's how she's still alive up to this point. Living in the slums, she unsuspectingly saves the life of one of the crown princes and finds herself entered into something called the Purging Trials. So the Purging Trials acts as a showcase, if you will, of the elite's magical abilities, often brutal, often dangerous, often very competitive. And of course, Payden has none. I just have like so much to unpack for this read of mine. This is just not a well-written book, and I feel really disappointed to have to say that. And I think if you've watched my book reviews for quite a long time, you know that I am not like particularly a scathing critic. I often like a lot of books that a lot of people would class as badly written. I am very much just like here for the vibe that a book brings me. I always used to joke that I had like bad taste in books. Anyway, I don't need to give that big explanation, but like I like bad books. This is the thing. I do like bad books. I say this a lot. Bad, subjective, whatever. So I binged it, right? But for me, it wasn't the kind of binge enjoyment that allows me to look past the kind of bad bits of the book. I'm going to start with the positives, and that was the Prince brothers. I love me a Prince brother. They were both hot. I enjoyed them. I enjoyed their kind of like dual personalities, you know, this opposites thing. One of them's blonde, very kind, but not as benevolent as we think. And then one of them's like dark, scary, evil, but actually really soft-hearted. I like that. Kai, who's our like male love interest. I don't like the names Pei and Kai, first of all. But I did think that he had me kicking my feet and giggling at some points. He was rather romantic when he wasn't being insufferable. He's hot on a flirt, what's not to like? Unfortunately, I am a sucker for a dark-haired prince with light eyes, and I don't think that's a crime. But this is kind of where the positive review ends, and I just feel like I was reading an entirely different book to what everyone has been recommending me. These are some of my thoughts that I typed down at 1 a.m. because I finished the book at 1 a.m. and I just needed them down and I had no one to message about it. So I just have some like very brief notes here. I'm reading off a screen, so sorry if I look down. So point 1 is that it's a Hunger Games ripoff, and I've added some points to bolster this. Pei is a talented archer. Dead dad. Arena. Multiple arenas, partnering in the arena, so making alliances, children fighting to the death, gifts left in the forest by viewers/sponsors, highlights streamed to an audience, constant nightmares. Basically, I thought this was every single young adult fantasy trope under the sun. Writing style I found incredibly repetitive. Eyes, there was so much emphasis on eyes. If I have to read the phrase ocean eyes one more time, and a lot about mossy green eyes, there was just a lot about eyes going on. I know that like a lot of writing has repetition, but this was like phrases. Ocean eyes, green mossy eyes, daggers to the throat, you vicious little thing. If he says that one more time, it was actually like making me cringe. He's always like, he said it like every paragraph. He's like muttering like, oh, you vicious little thing. And she called him a cocky bastard. I get that that's like their repartee, that's their thing they call each other, but it was like every other sentence to himself and in conversation. Multiple typos and editing issues, which I find really shocking when books have that. Lauren Roberts needs a better editor because it wasn't just the one, it was a few. I remember being really shocked, and it really pulls me out the story. Spoiler alert coming up, so you've probably got like 5 seconds to fast forward from now. Okay, so Adina was killed as a plot driver, as a twist, or whatever you want to call it. I don't really think it worked effectively because they hadn't shown us enough of Pei and Adina's friendship for it to be effective, for it to be like heart-wrenching in a way that it was intended to be. We weren't invested in them, so it didn't have the impact it should have. Basically, we went like a good third of the book with no Adina until it was convenient for Adina to be brought back to the castle. The names of the elites and their abilities, honestly, like when we found out the names of the elites and their abilities, it just felt really lazy. It felt lazy and a bit reductive. So like they all have nicknames for their type of abilities. So the elites that are like really super strength and super strong, they're called brawnies. The elites that can like clone themselves are called cloners. The elites that can like essentially teleport by looking somewhere are called blinks. I don't know, it felt a bit obvious to me. It felt weird, like I don't know, the magic system overall just felt really hazy and underdeveloped, and again that kind of like lazy writing where abilities and powers are added at like late crucial stages. They're just being like dropped in. So like with the last trial, you've got blooms all of a sudden being added out of nowhere as a way to like explain how they turned this around. And also I think the king was a rubbish villain. Anyway, that's it. I don't really like spending this much time talking negatively about a book, but this one, there was just so much wrong with it that it was like a bit laughable at points. Anyway, that's me done on that. I don't really like talking about books so negatively for such a long time, especially when there's other books in this review that I won't have spent as much time on positively reviewing. I felt so compelled to speak about this in depth because so many of us had spoken on Instagram together, like in DMs, about what we thought of this book, and it was nice to know that it wasn't just me. After all that, I probably will read the second one because I need to know what happens, because the book was left on a cliffhanger. Really interested to hear other people's thoughts on it. I just didn't like it. Right, so my next book is a book I read physically, but I don't actually know what I've done with the physical copy of it, so I don't have a physical book to hold up to you. I've put it away somewhere and I think I've lost it. Just had another skim for it and I literally don't know where I've put it, but it is Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. I'll put a little photo on the screen for you. This is a romance book. This is also book 3 of the Brown Sisters trilogy. Eve Brown is the youngest of the Brown sisters and has always been a hot mess. She flits from venture to venture, hobby to hobby, and business to business. When her general sense of messiness ruins one of her clients' weddings, her parents put their foot down and they have enough and they cut her off. Eve has a chance now to grow up and to prove herself and prove to everyone that she can make it and she knows what she wants to do. Jacob is a B&B owner in a small village who is an utter fucking control freak, and conveniently he needs to hire a chef when Eve turns up. Okay, so I love this book and it was my favourite Brown Sisters book out of all 3 of them, and that is quite high because I did really enjoy all of them and I felt like each one got better than the last. So I would really recommend all 3 books to anyone that loves romance books. I think Talia Hibbert is just so incredibly consistent when it comes to cute romance books, lovely, lovable characters, and writing really good chemistry and sex scenes, and variable sex scenes, because I sometimes find that with authors with multiple books in the same series, it can sometimes feel like the same sex scene from book to book or the same kind of like chemistry, and sometimes you get this repetitiveness in their writing style, but that wasn't the case here for me. Anyway, I'm actually going to review the actual book now. I felt so connected to Eve. Oh, my heart breaks for her. She just wants to do what's right for her. She just wants to try everything. She is just struggling to be taken seriously and wants to find her way. Like, I don't know, the first quarter of the book, it just like my little heart just couldn't take it. I really felt for her. She really resonated with me. I love the way her and Jacob interact throughout the first half of the book, because she is such a light, fun character and he is so kind of like set in his ways. Although I do feel that we lose a little bit of that in the second half of the book, where the romance kind of ramps up. Jacob is autistic, and honestly, like any kind of positive autistic or neurodivergency representation in the media where the main characters are kind of shown as a romantic lead, as attractive, as being capable of having kind of that romantic relationship in a fully autonomous way, and also just being sexual beings, is like so important to me. It like makes me feel a little bit emotional sometimes because we just don't get enough of it, especially where their neurodivergency is kind of like an add-on to the storyline, but there's not like a huge amount of like neurodivergency based trauma as a plot driver. He's an autistic main character, yes. The autism is part of the book, yes, but it's not this big like circle jerk of trauma. It's really rare. It's really important to me as like a neurodivergent person, and yeah, it just like it moves me a little bit, especially as both of the characters are neurodivergent in very different ways. So it shows that neurodivergency is different for a lot of people and it's not this kind of like one set mold. It just gives me warm fuzzies, you know. Most romance books do a third act breakup, which you all know I'm not like a huge fan of, and I think given that there are such obvious communication style differences between Eve and Jacob, it was quite obvious in the lead up to the third act breakup what was going to happen and that would be the cause of it, etc. But that didn't detract from my enjoyment of the book. It was just like kind of obvious what their issues were going to be as a couple. I just think it was a really lovely read. I really love this like cozy B&B kind of setting as they work together to rescue a small business. That felt nice. Their chemistry was very tangible to me, and yeah, I'm just really glad to have enjoyed this book and this series as much as I did, but I'm quite sad that the series has come to an end now. I would like a fourth one. On to my last and my final book, which was an audiobook. It's the only audiobook I did this month, I think, and it was The Only One Left by Riley Sager, which is a thriller. Okay, so the Hope family murders scandalised the whole of the Maine coast in the 20s, and everyone believed 17-year-old Lenora Hope to be responsible for her family's murders, but the police were never quite able to prove it. Fast forward to the 1980s, and a home health aide or nurse, Kit McDear, is sent to Hope's End to provide care for Lenora, who is unable to walk or talk and only has ability to move her left hand due to a series of strokes she suffered. One night she uses said left hand to tap out a message on the typewriter to Kit saying that she would like to tell Kit everything. I audiobooked this, and I don't usually go for a thriller, but I am actually quite partial to a thriller on audiobook if the narrator's good, and the narrator for this was very good. I really enjoyed her voice, her tone, how she told the story, so that's a good thing about that. Other than that, I just didn't really love it. I just felt like it dragged on for forever. It felt like it was twice as long as it needed to be. This is my first ever Riley Sager book, but I was recommended this by a few people actually, this specific book. I think it just missed the mark for me, and I found it quite hard to be engaged after the first kind of half of the book. I know it's supposed to be twisty and confusing, it's a thriller, it's supposed to be very meandering and kind of you never know what's going to happen next, but honestly, I've just felt like it was hard to follow. I don't think that this time that's an issue for my like listening or reading comprehension. I just think it was hard to follow. Instead of being like, oh my god, wow, gasp, really surprised on each twist, I was just kind of like, oh really, another one? I don't know, like I just felt like it was a case of that the twists were taken maybe a bit further than they needed to be. I don't know if anyone else has felt like that with this specific book. None of the characters felt particularly likeable to me, and especially the main character Kit just felt a bit like meh. This sounds like it's a bad review, and it wasn't a bad review, and it wasn't bad enough for me to DNF it. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, I just kind of wasn't that enamoured with it. I think if I wasn't listening to it, maybe I would have DNF'd, but also maybe I would have enjoyed it a bit more. I'm not a huge fan of this like dual timeline writing, so I think that was kind of difficult for me. I'm gonna give you 5 seconds to get away because I'm gonna do a spoiler, but this is the last book I'm reviewing, so this is the last I have to say on this book as well, so the video is ending shortly anyway. Here are your 5 seconds. So hear me out, I just find it pretty unbelievable that you would spend 15 years of your life pretending to be completely infirm, mute, motionless, unable to walk, unable to talk, pissing and shitting yourself, and letting other people take care of you, bath you, change your adult diapers, change your adult nappies, all to spite your sister, letting everyone think that you are too unable to take care of your own basic needs in this life, and living generally, voluntarily, a poor quality of life. I don't like to use that word, but all of that just to spite your sister. That's unbelievable to me. I don't know, don't you agree? Oh yeah, it was all a bit much for me, to be honest. It was too much drama. But yeah, that's the end of my reviews for the month. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's video and all my various reviews. I would be really curious to know what you think. I don't use a Goodreads account, I use a Storygraph account, so I will put links to my Storygraph, to my socials and all of that jazz in the description box below. You can add me as a friend on Storygraph. You can see my TBR on there and kind of like what I've read for the year so far, what I plan to read, etc. And on Instagram I tend to post on my stories what I'm reading like as I'm starting it, so it's a good way to keep up with my books live if you are a bookish person. Thank you so much for watching. It was a very mixed review video today and I feel a bit like nervous about posting it because I don't usually talk that bad about books, but I felt bad for doing it today. I just am a bit of a softie. So yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear where we disagree because that's always really interesting to me. And if you liked today's video, a little like or a subscribe if you like my content is meaning the world to me. I feel like we're growing such a little wonderful space on YouTube and I feel like my videos are doing really well, so it's making me really happy. I get so many lovely messages from all of you as well on Instagram. I know I don't get to all of them, but I do try my hardest. Have a lovely start to your week. I will see you on the next upload and thank you so much.